Identifying the factor in an exponential function. There are two basic ways to write your standard exponential function. The first way is y equals a times b raised to the x. This is the technique your calculator uses. The second type is frequent in books, which is y equals c times a to the x. However, both techniques have two constants and two variables. Your lead constant is called the initial value. The second constant is called your factor. I prefer using b, the original standard format that your calculator uses for an exponential function. So if you have a basic exponential function like this, it's quite easy to identify the initial value as the 20. To identify the factor, it is simply the 1.2, your second number, in your exponential function. However, as the other complicated ways of writing an exponential function, such as a doubling time function, where you might have a function that looks like this, we actually have more than two constants visible. However, in your basic format, there are only two constants, the initial value and the factor. So to identify the factor in this format, what I'm going to do is, we know it's not the y value, so we're looking at the second part. I'm simply going to replace the input variable with a 1. Now, looking at the original function, it's clear that the initial value is 100, which means that's not the factor. So, as I'm looking at the rest must be the factor 2 to the 1/3. Now I can utilize my calculator to simplify that and simply plug in my calculator 2 raised to the 1 divided by 3, and I get a number of approximately 1.2599. I'm simply going to round that to 1.260. So that is approximately my factor. Now, when we're dealing with any type of growth function, if depending on what my units of x are, I would have a rate of growth of 0.26 or 26% per unit of input. An example of this might be a finance application. Where I have an amount, let's say $500, doubling every 10 years. So the question is, what is my annual growth rate? Well, to determine the annual growth rate, we first must determine the factor. And again, it's not going to be the output variable a. So simply by rewriting it with a 1 for the input and simply removing the initial value of 500, because we know that's not part of the factor. Again, there's only two values in an exponential function, your initial value and your factor. If the initial value is 500, then the factor must be the 2 to the 1/10. Again, I'll plug that in my calculator. 2 raised to the parentheses 1 divided by 10 is a factor of approximately 1.072. Which means I have a 7% annual growth rate. In finance, this is often referred to as the effective yield.